The Fall of Castor, as recorded by King Castor himself. As I did with the journal entries of King Calvus, so I have done with the writings of my elder brother Castor. Here I have compiled the writings of Castor, which I found in his journal. After Calvus was dethroned, and after he had exiled himself with his wife Glora to the rift plain Pyra, my elder brother Castor was chosen to be the next king, for our father Puluvius had been killed. After the death of our father Puluvius, and after we had attended his funeral, we were called before the Ultaran Council, before Urca, the judge of the court. Urca said unto us, Now that Puluvius is gone, we must crown our next king, who will lead this kingdom in wisdom. And he looked at Castor first, and he continued, saying, Castor, since you are the firstborn son of Puluvius, you shall be the one who takes the crown. Then Castor knelt, smiling, and said, Oh, thank you. This glorious news shall bring peace to my roiled and despairing soul. For we were still mourning the loss of our father. Though I loved my father, I still took notice of his deceitful ways, and I do not hold any bitterness toward Calvus for what he did. By the end of the week, the preparations for the coronation were finished, and there were thousands gathered at the palace gates to witness the crowning of their new king. My brother Castor stood before them with a proud glare in his eyes, and he was wearing extravagant robes, embellished with gold jewels. Magar, the one in charge of royalty management in the council, held a crown made of gold and silver above Castor's head. And he said unto Castor, Castor, the moment this crown touches the hairs of your head, you shall be king. Lead this kingdom in wisdom, just as Ankajar did, and just as your father would have. The people gave a great shout of joy when the crown was placed upon his head. The trumpets sounded, and now Ultaira had her new king. Now here is an entry from Castor's diary, which he had been keeping since our childhood. This is what he added to it after his coronation. Today I have become the king of Ultaira. It is a wonderful thing, truly. However, this pain I have as part of my soul does not leave, even now. Never has this sorrow within my heart been set free from its cage. I wish this desire would be fulfilled, that the longing in my heart would be satisfied. Mayhap when I am enthroned as king, maybe then shall I find love. For if I obtain great riches, and my wealth surpasses that of many others, then certainly a woman must desire me. Oh, how my heart yearns eagerly for a woman, that she would be my queen, and that I could be one with her. Will the day ever come? My brother Castor shared this with me soon after he was crowned as king, and I tried to counsel him. But after all these years he has never put my advice into practice, so his sorrow has never left. Because he is my elder brother, and I am the youngest, he may view my thoughts on things as without merit. Though this never bothered me. Now I will cease my own personal narrative from this point, and I shall now put forth the journal entries of Castor, from the time he was made king of Ultaira. As the custom has been for the kings of Ultaira past, to record their endeavors while on the throne, so I have decided to do as well. After having been made king of Ultaira, I have felt a great sense of pride overtake me, as I am the first to not be of the bloodline of the Fraser family. I still hold a strong grudge for Calvus, the man who killed my father. However, to maintain my good image among the members of the council, I shall not go to Pyra to take his life. Recently I had been experiencing such great sorrow in my soul, to the point where I was brought to my knees every night. And so, I thought to myself one night, why am I feeling sorry for myself? I am now the king. I shall take matters into my own hands, and I shall find a woman who will be by my side for the rest of my life, for this loneliness stings. So when I sat on my throne the next morning, I called my servants before me. I ordered them, do this for me, my loyal servants. Go out to the city and find as many beautiful women as you can. They must be between the ages of 20 and 35. For I seek for myself a wife, that this loneliness I feel will finally be rid from my heart. Though they seemed to hesitate for a moment, they nevertheless obeyed me. My guards went out into the city to find beautiful women, and they brought them back to the palace to present them before me. Now before me in the throne room were 48 women, and most of them were well dressed, meaning they were from the first-class living district. They were indeed very pleasing to look upon, so I said to my servants, You've done well picking the right roses from the garden, my servants. These dames are exceedingly beautiful. Then one of the women said, What have you brought us here for? So I replied, One of you will be my wife. I seek a queen for myself. So, which of you will love me for me?" But another woman said, "Your Highness, we are honored to be in such a position, but we wish to return to our homes." Then I questioned her motive to return home, and another responded, "We are honored to be noticed by you, our king. However, we do not wish to marry you. Besides this, one of us has a husband waiting for her at home. Also, we do not find ourselves attracted enough to you." Then a feeling of shame washed over me, and I clenched my fists. My servant turned and said to me, "My lord, it would be wise for you to send these women back to their homes. What you have requested is not something you can achieve with forceful command." I rested my forehead upon the palm of my hand, and I said to my servant, "You would have my soul condemned to Heilven." "I mean not to judge you, my lord," he said. Then I said unto my servants who had brought the women to me, "Very well, you may return them to their homes." I don't know why I ever expected something to happen in the first place. I took a deep sigh. The women left me and returned to their homes. I spent that night crying in bed. Truly the pain stings. I soon decided to travel to the land of Pashur to find for myself a wife. Upon leaving the palace, I brought a squad of soldiers with me to the lot of royal chariots. And I said to the soldiers, "I shall travel to the land of Pashur to search the land for a wife, which I shall take for myself to be my queen." So we boarded the royal chariots and set off to the land of Pashur. Before we reached Pashur, I decided to have a stop by the town of Benna in the mountains of Grianara. There, we fed the horses and rested, for my soldiers had grown tired on the road. There in Benna, I agonized over my own thoughts, so I could not rest. So I decided to roam the streets while my soldiers slept. There was still daylight, so the streets were busy. About 4 hours passed before my soldiers had awoken. After they had, we set off again to continue on the road to the land of Pashur. We gained a lot of attention from the people of that town. In 12 hours, we reached the city of Elvok in the land of Pashur. The city of Elvok lies on the outer rim of the land of Pashur, and that is why I decided to travel to that city, so that the journey would not be any longer than it needed. The city of Elvok was built with much Barzan stone, a rock found in the basin of Emek, and it is the same material that was used by Auden and Audia when they built their house. This was something that impressed me as we approached the city. We stopped outside by the city gates, where there was a chariot stable. The city guard approached us, asking, "Are you sojourners from the land of Grianara, or of Ultyra?" I said to him, "I am King Castor of Ultyra, and this is my royal guard." Immediately he gasped, and bowing said, "Forgive me. I did not know a new king had been enthroned." He let us through the gates after asking us what our business there was. I told him we were there for sightseeing, and I assured him that we were not there as spies to start a war. When we roamed about their streets, the citizens began whispering to each other, and they were scared that we were there to start a war. But I reassured the people, shouting, "Be still, people of Elvok. We have not come to start a war. We have come to merely look upon this ancient city." My words caused their panic to cease. Now the city of Elvok has in it a large bazaar area, which is in a building of its own. It is called the Oscurarium, and most of the citizens there roam about shopping. Many of the townsfolk in the surrounding area of Pashur come to Elvok just to tour the Oscurarium. That was the place I decided to search for a wife. I regret this now, but I still did it, nonetheless. When I entered the place, I saw that the halls were densely crowded. I even saw many elf women walking about the halls. I said to my guards, "Remain here at the entrance, for I shall go in on my own to find a wife." And they said, "What if the city guard arrests us for this?" "They will not arrest me, for I am the king of Ultyra," I replied. I went out into the market to begin my search. The first woman I spoke with was a woman from the western continent, from the land of Senoa. She had brown skin and red eyes, and she was wearing an exotic Senoan dress. When I asked for her name, she said, "My name is Nera." But when I had asked her to return with me to Ultyra, she declined, saying, "I do not wish to be with you." And so, I left her to speak with other women. Eventually it became twilight, and still not a single woman had accepted me, to come to Ultyra and to be my queen. I returned to my guards at the entrance and saw them sitting up against the walls of the entrance. And I said to them, "My mission has failed. We shall continue our journey south to the marshlands of Savia." Upon entering my royal chariot, I broke down in tears, and loneliness became my covering. The chariots reached the marshlands in about a day's journey. We came to the marshlands of Savir south of the eastern continent. And there in the marshlands we camped for about a few hours. After we had rested in our tents, I gave the order for us to pack up and continue onward. We crossed the river on a larger ship, to have space to contain all our belongings. Once we reached the land of Evenhara and made it out of the swamp, we came to the beginning of the road which leads to the city of Nivai in the west. The road was harsh on our horses and carriages, as there were many deep puddles of mud along the way. Now in the land of elves, we followed the road signs to direct us toward the city of Nivai. Since the signs were written in Elvish, I had my servant translate them for me. After about 6 hours, we finally reached the city of Nivai, which was stunningly magnificent to look upon, even from afar on the road. As it was with our visit to Elvok, so it was there. I parked the chariots just outside the city gate and paid the stable keeper to watch them. The city gate had a great ring arching over it, and it was made of mitrite, a very strong and dark metal, mined from the deepest mines of Grianara. When we entered through the gate into the city, many of the elves stopped to stare at us. My desire for being recognized as royalty was satiated, and I had hoped there I could meet a woman who would love me. But love availed me not. No, but it ran from me to hide like a child fearing the scorn of his father. I stood in the center of the city square, with all my guards and servants surrounding me and the crowd. The crowd stood several feet away from me, forming the shape of a circle. Then I began to speak to the crowd, saying, "I am King Castor of Ultyra, and I come in peace. I have come in search of my queen. For I have not yet found her, and I know she must be out there somewhere. Will I find her here?" After I finished speaking, I had my guards go out into the crowd to speak with different women, to see if they would return with me to the kingdom. But none of them would agree to come. With no woman coming out to speak with me, I left my guards to continue searching while I returned to sit in my chariot outside the city gate. 2 hours passed, and finally my guards returned with 2 women, saying from outside the chariot, "Your Highness, we have found 2 women who would speak with you." And I said, "Bring them inside." The first woman entered my chariot, and she sat across from me on the other seat. "What is your name?" I asked the woman. She replied, "I am Veliel, Highness." Then I beseeched her, "Tell me, would you be willing to return to my kingdom with me? You could become the queen of Ultyra. If not, tell me what I have done wrong." And Veliel replied, "I apologize, Highness, but I am not willing to go with you. I have grown up here since I was a young girl, since I was taken from my home in Ahana. This city is part of my very soul, and I would never leave it behind." Then I said, "Very well, then you may go." She said as she left the chariot, "It was a pleasure to meet you, King of Ultyra." As soon as Veliel left, the second elf woman entered to sit in the chariot. When I asked her for her name, she said it was Telbai. And I said, "Will you reject my offer as well? If you would come with me to my kingdom, you would be rich beyond comparison. For behold, the palace of Ultyra is filled with much wealth, and you would be treated well. You would be the queen of Ultyra. If you would also reject me, then tell me what I have done wrong." And Telbai said, "I find your countenance to be fair, true. However," and I interceded, saying, "However? What more do you need than for me to be fair?" She continued, saying, "No woman would go with any man, no matter how much gold or silver he has, nor how handsome he is, if they do not know him with their whole heart first. If you seek to find yourself a wife, then seek elsewhere, anywhere but the land of the elves. For we elves esteem ourselves for not lowering our thoughts and behavior to that of the Humes." With those words, I gave up on searching outside of Ultyra for a wife. I said to Telbai, "Then you may leave as well." Now I had my guards release the women back to their city, and we left to return to the land of Ultyra. We boarded the carrier ship to cross the Savir, and we returned to the land of Paishah. The journey from Paishah to Ultyra was a long and strenuous one, and my pillow in the chariot became wet with tears. The longer I dwelt on my sorrow and loneliness, the more I could feel a subtle rage boil up from within. My body was trembling, and my nerves were dancing underneath my skin, the lamentations of my heart overflowing. When we finally returned to the kingdom after our journey to and from the land of Evenhara, I slammed shut the doors of my chamber, and shouted, "To Heilven with royalty! What good is it being the king if I still can't obtain that which I've been lacking?" Sitting upon my bed, I took up my pen and paper to write out how I felt that day in my diary. I shall place the entry here. This loneliness is the bane of my life. I came to the throne hoping my name would be renowned, and that a woman could finally fall in love with me. But now I see how wrong that assumption was. How wrong I was to assume that fame and wealth alone would make me easier to love. But I'm not easy to love, am I? The elves think lowly of me, but so do the Humes. Not only did Nivai, a city of elves, reject me, but Elvok, a city of common people. This pain tempts me to end my life. But I shall keep going a little further, to hold on to any last hope that I may find the one to stay by my side on the throne forever. Nevertheless, I still find it difficult to have hope. Yes, it is very hopeless indeed. How can I find her? Is it even in the realm of possibility? I think not. If common women cannot view me with longing eyes, how then could anyone love me? Woe is me, for I am ceaselessly in pain and agony in the blackness of this unfair solitude. After I wrote this in my diary, I placed it back inside my desk and fell asleep. I shall not go into the details of the nightmare I had, for it pains me to recall it. All I can say is that an evil spirit tormented me all night long, and I felt as though I were trapped in my dreams. Then, after I had woken up from that nightmare, I heard a voice like a woman say to me from the balcony outside the window, "Why are you striving after these things? Why do you worship pleasure rather than the light? Remember the light, and remember the one who sits enthroned." But when I looked over at the balcony, I only saw a flash of light as it flew upward. Then after I had gotten up around noon the next day, I heard a knock on my door. Upon opening the doors, I saw that it was one of my servants. And he said, "Sire, you were meant to be working on paperwork in the royal office this morning, and now you should be seated on the throne." And I said, "Why waste time telling me this? Could you not tell that I was sleeping?" "It is merely my duty, sire." "I had no ill intent in telling you this," he replied. Now this servant I know is still particularly loyal in his heart to Calvus, for I constantly overhear him talking about Calvus with the other servants of the palace. After dismissing the servant from my presence, I went to the throne room to sit upon my throne. There were 6 guards standing before the throne, and one of them said, "What would you have us do for the day, Your Highness?" Instead of replying to them with my words, I stood from the throne to walk down to them. I gestured to them to follow me, and I brought them to the room behind the throne room. Inside the room, I stood in front of the map of the lands of Arden. "What have you brought us here for? And why will you not speak?" they asked. Now my heart was burning with indignation, and I sought to destroy a city. The destruction of any city would satiate my bloodlust, so I cared not which city I picked from the map. With gritted teeth, I sternly stated, "Whichever city my finger lands on, that city will be brought to dust under my strong hand." So I closed my eyes and faced the map, tracing my finger across it. When I opened my eyes to see where my finger stopped, I saw it had stopped on the western continent, on the land of Sedima, on the city of Hether. Then I turned to face my guards, and I said, "Their fate is sealed. Prepare the troops from each corner of the city walls, and prepare the dreadnought Medela for our journey." Behold, I had gathered the armies of Ultira in the aerodrome, and we stood before the dreadnought Medela. And not only would we take the Medela, but other military ships as well. So began our journey toward the western continent, and the trip over the sea took about a week's time. Over the course of the flight my soldiers trained in the lower decks of the dreadnought. I also had many men working on the arc-light crystals each day, to maintain the ship's lift. As we approached the land of Sedima, and could see the coast in the distance, I had my army prepare for battle. And I said to my generals, "Begin lowering the ship above the shore, and we shall attack the city as soon as the doors of the ship fall upon the beach." And as we drew closer to the shore of Sedima, my fleet began descending from the clouds. The fleet of smaller airships came down to the water to sail toward the beach, and I had the dreadnought hover over them as they lowered their anchors in the shallow water. The city of Hether was asleep, and there were no patrols or soldiers walking along the beach. I unsheathed my claymore, and I led my army into the city through its gates. And I commanded my generals, saying, have your aeons skilled in blaze arclight burn down their ships, so that none may escape to the sea. And if one does, our ships will take it down. And when the aeons had set the bays on either side of the coast on fire, a horde of guards from the inner part of the city came out from the gates. As they came closer to us, they grew hesitant in their advance, as they saw our army. General Ilka, who is over all the aeons, ordered his soldiers to attack. The aeons in the back of my army began firing bolts of blaze and plasma arclight into the air, and the arclight fell upon the Hether soldiers and struck them down. As we began our attack, some of their guards retreated into the gates of the city to sound the trumpets. By the time the trumpets sounded, we had charged through the horde of guards blocking the entrance to the city. The people sleeping in their homes were quickly awoken, and they began to panic as they ran around the city. I charged into the city through its gates, my army following behind me, and we brought down the walls of the gates. Once we had entered through the city gates, I sent a squad of soldiers to raid the palace courtyard of King Jehisu. Jehisu was known for his cowardice and would always avoid conflict with other nations for fear of battle. But I had brought the war to him now, and he could not escape. As we wrought destruction upon the city near the bay, some of the citizens of the city fled to the desert outside the gates toward the west, while some others stayed hidden in their homes, holding on to their possessions. Now when we had reached the city square, there were common folk scattering about the street. I ordered my aeons to fire their arclight at them, and they were set ablaze. They ran like torches throughout the city. Soon came the army of the palace, and Jehisu's personal guards were leading them. I could see that they were afraid. After all, I am indeed the king of the greatest kingdom of all the nations. As I unsheathed my sword, I ran to the side of Jehisu's army, and I hurried towards the palace entrance. Meanwhile, my army was busy cutting down their soldiers, as well as the soldiers who remained on the bay side of the city. Once I had entered Jehisu's palace, I snuck behind the walls and kept my feet light, in order to not gain attention from other guards. As I passed a certain corridor, I peeked through the red curtains which led into a chamber and saw a man sleeping, and his room was decorated with palm branches. I decided that I would have to slaughter this man, along with any other person in the palace, after I had assassinated their king. I continued down that corridor and turned left, which is where I found the entryway to Jehisu's chamber. Jehisu had a great curtain covering his doorway, and it was dyed with royal purple dyes. Also on either side of it were palm trees planted in clay vases dipped in gold. Indeed, the city of Hether, like many cities in the land of Sedima, was wealthy in regards to gold. But now I would take it all from them, and it made my heart glad. Because the curtain was heavy, I had to take time lifting it, without making noise. Once the curtain was high enough for me to see into the chamber, I saw that Jehisu was cowering in fear, hiding in the far left corner by the window. I thought to myself then, what a sad excuse for a king. His people shall die with him and his cowardice. I was able to sneak under the curtain at that moment, and I stood and pointed my sword towards him. Immediately he noticed me, and he shouted with great fear, "Guards! Kill him! How did you let him pass through these halls unnoticed?" Then I said to him, "You have great amounts of gold in your city, do you not?" "I can see it. I see gold in every corner of this humble city. And thanks to your army's humble size, I was indeed able to make it past them to reach you. Your servants and family will die along with you tonight." After I spoke, I swung my sword across his neck, and I watched him bleed to death under the window. He screamed, yet his voice could not escape his mouth. Afterwards I killed every last person who was in the palace on my way out. Upon exiting the palace, I saw that my army was successful in wiping out most of the Hether soldiers. This did not surprise me, of course. Before I congratulated my soldiers, I decided to take out the rest of the Hether soldiers myself. The remaining soldiers were too weak to resist, so it was barely a battle. Now my claymore was painted with blood, and it surely was satisfying to see. The pain of my loneliness began to lessen that night as I satiated my bloodlust. I felt the power of the darkness resonating in my soul at its core, and I had never felt more alive because of it. That night truly was spectacular, and I praised my soldiers on the way back across the Great Sea towards the Western continent. In about a week, we finally landed in the aerodrome in the second quadrant of the kingdom, and my soldiers returned to their regular posts in the city. Now when I began preparing myself for rest that night, a servant of the palace came to speak with me. He said, "What did destroying the city of Hether accomplish for this kingdom? Your father stood against Calvus from the beginning, even before he used his bloodlust against him, and you supported your father in this. Yet here you stand, relishing in the same bloodlust." I did not dwell on what he said, and anger rushed into my heart. And I replied to him, saying, "Begone out of my sight. I desire to slumber tonight. I will not have your words of judgment nagging at me, keeping me awake." And with those words, he soon left me alone so that I could rest. It has been many days since I last wrote in this journal. Indeed, the duties of the king are taxing. A strong depression has been taking over me, ever since the members of my palace began confronting me with their judging of my character. And my servants have asked me, "Why have you not found joy, even after you besieged the city of Hether?" Not only that, but my heart has been weighed down heavily as of late, because I have still not yet found a woman who would love me and be my queen. The nights alone in my chamber are long and difficult indeed. Because of this great burden I had, and yet still carry, I decided to speak with a trusted servant. I entered one morning into the hall of the royal household, where the servants of the palace and the royal family of Fraser dwell and have meals with one another. I came to a particular servant's living quarters, whose name is Ind, to speak with him. After letting me into his room, he said, "Your Highness, good morning. What is it you must tell me? I will listen." And I said, "I know of your learnedness in the studies of Oresta and of Rift Plains. I also know that you have had many journeys and adventures on the other worlds. And you know that I have been looking for a queen for myself. Hence, I ask if you know of any country or land, on any rift plain, where there may be a damsel who could love me. If not, which is doubtful, then tell me where I could begin." I then replied, saying, "Your Highness, there are many legends of the Fairy of the Lake. She dwells on Kailiska, in a great lake called Lacridoria, a lake surrounded all around by a village of wise fairies. The fairies there guard the way to the lake, for the Fairy of the Lake can only be summoned by those who are deemed worthy by them. They say that the Fairy of the Lake can grant the wishes of the pure-hearted, and that she can heal the souls of those who have fallen to the darkness." When he said this, I doubted him. Regardless, I decided to make the journey to Lacridoria on Kailiska, in case the legends were true. Before leaving his room, I said, "If I am correct in saying this, there are not many rift gates which connect to Kailiska. Make for me a rift gate to Kailiska by the end of tomorrow. I know you can do this. You may search the vault to find the right rift crystals. I also hear there are no rift ships designed or equipped with the proper rift crystals to fly to Kailiska." He said, "It will be done." With that, I returned to my chamber to rest. The next evening, I'd had a rift gate prepared for me in the palace basement. The gate was embellished with Kailiskan rift crystals, so that its portal would open to Kailiska. Then Ein said to me before the rift gate, "You should ask some of your most experienced alchemists of the royal house to come and adjust the portal. Because if you go in through it at this moment, you do not know what gate you may come out of when you arrive there." So I did as he suggested, and I called for 4 of my alchemists who were skilled in rift studies. Once the gate was prepared, I went through. I had left the council to be in charge while I was absent. Arriving on the rift plain Kailiska, I found myself standing before a strange mountain. But this land mass was not sculpted in a natural manner, at least not a seemingly natural manner. And strange plants and thorny trees were growing from its sides. Under the opening of the curved mountain was a great entrance, which was the entrance to the road which led to the city of the Lake of Lacridoria. When I approached the gate of the entrance, a fairy came from behind a booth decorated with colorful lights. The fairy had red eyes, silver hair, a large red ribbon in her hair, as well as blue wings which were outlined with a red hue. She said to me, "Hume, I perceive you to be a king. Is this not so?" And I replied, "Indeed I am." "But how did you know?" Then she said, "We fairy folk know many things. We are known for our wisdom, which was given to us as a gift by the precursor Toniel himself." Then I said, "And it seems he has gifted you with great humility as well. Tell me, what is your name?" She replied, "I am Windel, keeper of the city of Lacridoria." "And what business does a Hume king have in our humble city?" Then I explained, "I have come in search of a queen. From the mouth of my own servant, I have heard that this city guards the fairy of the lake. I have come to speak with her." After Windale heard my intent in visiting the city, she went back behind her hut by the mountain side. When she came out again, she said, "Stay at our inn for the night, and you may enter the lake tomorrow morning. I will have one of our watchers take you on a ferry to where she slumbers." After that, she sent me another fairy from the hut to guide me down into the city. As I entered the city itself, I began to feel very small, as though I weren't a king. There were fairies standing on the tops of trees and buildings, and fireflies filled the air like a warm fog. Once the fairy had taken me to the inn, she said to the fairy behind the counter, "This Hume is a king on Arden, the ruler of the kingdom of Ultyra. Therefore, Windale has decided to pay for his stay with her own silver." And she placed silver coins in her hand. The other fairy replied, "Thank you. The room upstairs in the back is open. Enjoy your stay." As I slept that night in the inn, I began to suspect that the fairies throughout the city who stared at me before knew why I was there. I barely slept that night, with paranoid thoughts swimming in my mind, though the atmosphere of the city was like a warm blanket. The next morning, I awoke to the sound of flutes playing outside the window. And the fireflies, which were golden at night, were purple in the morning. I left the inn and returned to Windale's hut at the entrance of the city. But when I got there, she was not in the booth. I said to those in the hut, "Where has Windale gone?" And they replied, "She left about 2 hours ago, saying that she would be waiting for your arrival at the lakeside house." I turned around and went back into the city, and I asked fairies for directions to the lakeside house. When I arrived at the lake, I saw Windale standing next to another fairy with silver hair and red eyes. And she said, "This is my twin sister, Noelle. I have spoken with her, and she has agreed to take you out to the center of the lake." Then Noelle said, "Climb aboard the ferry at the dock." After climbing aboard and leaving the dock, Noelle handed me a ruby jewel, saying, "This token will summon her, Mistress Lacradoria, from under the lake. Take heed that you have a pure heart before speaking to her." When we came to the center of the lake, Noelle said, "Here the lake is shallow, so you may stand in the water." I climbed off the boat, and I stood in the lake. A thick fog clouded my view, and Noelle said as she paddled away into the mist, "I leave you for now. I am not worthy to be in the presence of Lady Lacradoria." After standing there in the quietness of the still waters, and in the calm mist, I lifted the jewel. Once I lifted it, it began to radiate with a purple light, and the fog cleared from the lake. The water before me began to bubble and turn bright, before the fairy of the lake emerged from under it. Now she stood before me, and her body was clothed with a soaked lavender robe. She was about 7 feet tall, and her blonde hair could reach her knees. Her wings were bright pink. When she opened her eyes, bright purple lights shone out of them. Then she spoke unto me, saying, "Castor, son of Puluvius, and king of Ultyra, why have you come to see me?" I said to her, "I have heard of your ability to grant wishes from one of my servants. For many years I have been struggling with a painful loneliness, and I have sought after love, and yet have found nothing. I beg of you, let me find love. I would ask that you grant my wish, that the women of Ultyra would desire me when I return." After I said this, Lacradoria responded, looking down on me with a sorrowful countenance, "I see that the darkness is in your soul, and that it is overcoming your heart. I cannot grant a wish distorted by evil desires, which originate in the darkness." So I replied, saying, "No, my lady, let it not be so. I beseech you in all earnestness, let this pain leave me." Lacradoria then said, "Truly you are a man who has grown to know nothing of poverty or loss, yet here you stand before me, groveling in the water for that which you want. Very well, I shall grant you your wish. Return to your kingdom and receive what is due." And I said, "If it is true, then you have my highest gratitude." After I said this, she closed her eyes, and she began to descend into the lake. In about an hour, Noelle returned on her ferry boat, and she said, "We have heard what Lady Lacradoria has said to you. Come with me, and my sister will guide you on your way to the rift gate from which you came." And after we made it back to the bay, I returned with Windale to the entrance of the city. I soon arrived back in the palace, and my servantine welcomed me. He said, "My lord, how was your quest?" And I replied, "I believe it was successful, but only time will tell. We shall see if this fairy of the lake can truly grant wishes soon enough." "Then I presume she agreed to grant your wish," he said. I replied, "Indeed, though with much hesitation." After this, I wished him a good day's work, and I returned to my throne. I am Pollux, and I have now finished compiling the journal entries of my elder brother Castor. I am adding this entry so that those who may read these may know how the darkness ended my brother. Castor returned home from his sad endeavor in the city of Lacridoria on Kyliska, and his return marked the beginning of his downfall. I remained in my home near the Ulteran Council for the next 3 days after his return, so I am writing some of what I heard. On the first day of his arrival, he began to become exceedingly lazy. His servants would say to each other, "He has become so unkempt and filthy, and he stays in bed till noon sometimes." Many spoke of how he would complain whenever he was reminded of his duties as king of Ultira. Not only this, but he also imprisoned his servant Ind for assuming that he had lied to him concerning the fairy of the lake. After a few days staying at home, I left to go visit the palace, for I was concerned for my brother. When I entered the throne room, he was walking around a crowd of women who were brought there from the alleys of the fourth quadrant. And I heard him saying to them, "My chamber is lonely. I bid you come with me and enjoy the riches of the palace. I will grant you some of these riches, if indeed you will accept my love." He was eyeing them like a wolf circling its prey. I felt pity for him, and I felt compassion for the women he was holding captive. Therefore, I proceeded forward to rebuke him. I walked over to the crowd of women he was encircling, and he still did not recognize me, but he continued trying to persuade them to go with him into his chamber. And I said to him, "My brother, why are you doing this? Can you not see that they are uncomfortable in your presence?" Then he responded, "Who goes there? Did I let you in my house?" Then I said, "If you see this as your house alone, then you have been blinded by your entitlement." Castor replied, "Are you my judge? I was born before you, and you are my younger brother. Do not concern yourself with my personal matters. If you have a problem with what I am doing, then you may take it to the council. Are they not responsible for the king's actions?" And I said, "The king is responsible for his own actions." I continued, saying, "Whether or not I am older or younger than you, it is my duty to take care of my family. And for so many years I have seen you flirting with the darkness, and you have never shown any care to change your ways. Have you not read the scrolls in the palace library? Have you not read the workings of Sintha? And do you not understand how following the darkness will affect your fate?" Castor then replied, saying, "You have always been like this, Pollux. You were always the favorite of mothers, too. It must be a blessing to live a life of peace and blissfulness, ignorant to the painfulness of life." And as he began to raise his voice, the women looked at me with a look that begged for me to free them. I then said to Castor, "Do you no longer hold on to reason then, brother?" And he said, "Reason? What need have I of reason? What is reason? I do not know." Now I said to the women, "You are not enslaved by this man. Come to me, and I will lead you out of the palace." But Castor said, "They will do no such thing. I have paid for them myself. I say who goes and who stays, for this is my house." I then ceased reasoning with him, and I said to the women, "I will return for you." And I left the palace to go to the council. Once I was before Aranotha, I said, "Sir, Castor has bought slave women to serve as his own concubines. This is truly an evil thing for my eyes to behold, especially within the kingdom of Ultira, in the house of the royal line of the Fraser family." To my horror, Aranotha replied, "Let him do as he pleases, for he is the king. What good will it do for you, bringing up the Fraser name here? That name has been defiled by Calvus." Then I said, attempting to keep my voice soft, "Will you speak nothing of the king owning concubines? Am I going mad, or is the council losing its sense of right and wrong? For you caused the true heir of the throne to exile to Pyra, while you allow a man like Castor to keep the throne. I cannot stand for this." Aranotha did not respond for a moment. However, I could see the look of disdain on his face. I could see how the beast was influencing the hearts of those in the council. And since I could not gain the support of the council, I decided to free the concubines from Castor's clutch myself. I left the council before things turned for the worse. I returned to the palace throne room to face Castor yet again. And I took with me a sword, though I planned on not using it unless the situation was dire. Now Castor was not at his throne, but I knew he was in his chamber, along with all the concubines. I climbed up the stairs behind the throne room until I reached the king's royal chamber. I knocked on Castor's door, and there was no answer. But after 5 more knocks, I heard a voice from inside, that of a woman's, saying, "Let us alone or we will die." After hearing that, I unsheathed my blade and stuck it in the crevice of the doors. I pulled the blade upwards to cut loose the locking chain, and I kicked the doors open. Once inside, I almost fainted from the wretched sight before me. Castor was lying in his bed, and 5 women were bound by ropes beside him, and he was holding a dagger in his hands. Before his blade could fall, I jumped on the bed and cut the ropes binding the concubines. I shouted, "Run free!" And Castor screamed, saying, "No! They must stay. I need them." And his voice sounded inhuman, as if some demon had taken up residence in his body. I put my blade up against his throat, then said, "Who are you? Are you a brother of mine? What it is you have done is beyond my comprehension." And I couldn't help but grit my teeth when speaking to him. I no longer saw my brother in those eyes, but the eyes of a monster stared back at me. My voice could no longer reach him. He screamed, then grabbed my blade, and he cared not that his hand bled. He pushed my blade aside and jumped off the bed to escape the chamber. After I had let myself catch my breath, I looked around and saw his desk, where he had kept his journal entries. I stood by Castor's desk, beside the open window by the balcony, and I unraveled his scroll. It was there that I read through each of his journal entries, until I reached the end, where he had added one last note. Here is what he wrote. "Last night I had yet another nightmare that tormented me. I dreamt of all the things I had done in the past year of my reign. Many of them were things which I had not written about in my journal entries. I have just awoken from this dream, this painful reminder of the wickedness of my soul. I am hopeless. I know not what has happened to me. I would end my life, had I the courage to do so." Now after all these things had taken place, I had to return home to regain my composure. My heart was breaking under the weight of all the pressure. However, as I was lying down to rest, I heard the uproar of the city. My fear and curiosity got the better of me, and I arose to leave my house. After Castor had run out of the palace, he had taken a potsherd, with which he began to cut himself. He ran out into the center of the bazaar area of the city, where there are always great crowds of people. And he began screaming and growling, and his body seemed to contort and bend. His veins were black and blue, and the color of his eyes faded. After he fell to the ground, growling and screaming, his skin turned black like ink, and he breathed his last. All the people who were panicking in the streets finally calmed down when he had stopped moving. The crowds gathered around him to see who he was, but they kept some distance because they were afraid. Parents covered their children's eyes, and many others were weeping. The crowd then reorganized themselves to open a path for the royal guards who had been chasing after Castor. When they saw his body, they pointed their swords to the ground and bowed their heads. After they said a short word of prayer to Toniel, they circled around his body and picked it up. Though it was hard for me to see his body in such a state, and his soul absent from it, it was harder knowing where his spirit had now gone. He will never know any rest. Had he ever listened to me and heeded my advice, this would have never happened to him. At times I blame myself for his fall and his death. But the past can never be changed, and I must move on. After the royal house had finished preparing the funeral for Castor, the council made known to the people that the man who had died was indeed the king. And the people began to protest against having a mourning ceremony for him, for they said, "A man such as he deserves no mourning. Even Calvus was better than this man." The following days were taxing on my soul. During all the coronation events and meetings with the council, the grief in my heart never ceased. Nonetheless, I was faced with the weight of the crown. I do not care enough to write what my coronation ceremony was like. All I will say is that I did not deserve the amount of praise I received. I did not know so many knew my name. I am writing this now in my royal chamber, the same room where I witnessed my elder brother defile his soul. Now I have learned something new, that the heart well acquainted with grief is greatly humbled. The humbled heart grows in wisdom, and in wisdom the soul prospers.